really what we're trying to do is we're progressively refining the design. And yes, it may well be that the idea we had 5 years ago just was an idea whose time hadn't come, but that gives us the opportunity to see, well, why did we rule out that decision, and what's changed that enables us to make that decision, change that decision now. Remembering also that there's 5 years of elapsed, and the whole thing might have changed in that intervening time. The other thing that's really quite important is not only do we record every component that makes up the digital twin, the technical aspects of all the equipment items, the decision record, the schedule, and the status of things, but also we need to know which bits of it, especially during a project, are immature in the design process and which bits aren't. And that's where we've got this thing called maturity management. So associated with every item inside the digital twin is an understanding of its status in a common and consistent way. So we can say, you know, this pump, it's really, we've placed the purchase order, we've ordered the pump, we really shouldn't change it. Whereas this vessel, maybe they may not have started building it yet. So that's a really powerful thing, especially when it comes to managing change. Gives you the ability to focus on the things that where the cost of change is relatively small.
There's two thoughts now come into my mind, and let's put them down here and we'll decide how we get to them. But one is abstract concepts and actually modeling things like a decision. So that's one thing that I want to talk about. And the other thing is then later in the life, how do you make sure that if you search the model, your results are useful, so that you don't return every possible variant of an object over its entire life? So, okay, let's take the abstract concept thing. Steve, you've just mentioned the idea that you could go back and visit a decision. So in reality, that's really, really hard. I was just trying to search my emails for an incident that happened in 2013 on an interface we were building when we had a problem with it. And it was quite high profile at the time, and I got called at 3 in the morning. But I couldn't find a single document that summarized it, because at the time it was a stream of consciousness happening over telephone calls, text messages, emails. There was an incident report, but I couldn't find a copy of it on my local computer. We'd archived the project. The actual, what was very real at the time as a concept of an incident, actually to go back and visit it, the information had was all spread out, and it was very hard to find it. So that means on top of this idea of modeling your tags, your physical objects you want to build, you're going to need a way of modeling the fact that this is a decision. A decision has been taken. We haven't really explored that as a conversation at all, actually.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that, Andrew?
It would be extremely useful. It's probably a transformational thing that, that might be beyond what we've actually used it up to now, but the boundaries of this are moving all the time, Murray. Record the major decisions that are made. And as you say, it can be challenging to unpick them all. The digital twin becomes particularly useful, as I said before, when the job is actually getting into the clear forward path on a set concept going forward. I think that's where I've seen tremendous value come out of it. In terms of a decision record and how you got there, that's a great challenge for the future, isn't it?
I'm going to challenge that, Andrew, with a couple of war stories. Firstly, the railway project I recently worked on absolutely had to have the decision record as part of its digital twin. The reason being was the railway was going to be widened, and when and there's a railway running through Wimbledon that's going to need to be widened, by the way. And you're faced with a decision: do I widen the railway on the left-hand side of the railway or the right-hand side of the railway? And in order to do that, you're probably going to knock down somebody's house or somebody's business. The project needed to have absolute good grounding in the technical decision as to which side of the railway they widened it on for all time, because when the time comes to knock down somebody's house, they will raise it in a court of law, and they will go over and examine in minute detail the decision that led to that, the process that led to that decision, because that old lady doesn't want her house knocked down for very good reason. The other one is I don't know if you remember, but the Manic software,
Yep.
everyone loves to hate, was designed with that absolutely in mind. So generally, a decision is associated with something. It might be associated with a certain pump, it might be associated with a system, or it might be associated with an overall facility. We have decided to increase the throughput of a facility from 300 million barrels a day to 400, for example. So that really is you associate the decision, this abstract concept, with something physical. Just like a schedule, the date upon which you're going to install a vessel is associated with that vessel. And that boils down to, the geeky term is the data model. How are we going to connect the abstract decision item, decision object, with the physical object about that decision is bothered with? So whilst that's really difficult early on in a project, when you haven't defined your systems, you're still working at facility level. How many facilities, how many platforms are we going to use to develop that field? Is it going to be 3 or is it going to be 4? We can still associate that decision with something. We have to, in order to keep that decision record accurate. I'm not saying it's easy in the early stages. It gets a lot better and a lot simpler as the project matures and the number of objects in the asset grows and grows and grows.
So Dave, are you thinking then that a way to solve this is rather than having to model the decisions alongside the physical tags, you might just have a pointer?
Yes.
So you mentioned a system called Manic.
Yep.
Maybe that's your system of record for decisions, and all you're making then is a pointer between your main model. And so the end result from a user perspective is not some all-knowing system, some oracle that they can just consult. Why did we decide to do that? What it is they still have to follow a breadcrumb trail to some extent, but it's making that process a lot easier for them.
Yes, most certainly.
Okay, so we're not talking here about an all-knowing system. We're talking about making it much more efficient to follow the steps again in the future.